The Right Stuff is a thrilling, emotional, rip-roaring, old-fashioned Hollywood epic. Its story has a mythical, almost spiritual feel to it. It's patriotic without ever devolving into jingoism. It's funny, sad, exciting, soulful, without forgetting those popcorn moments. Its cinematography is gorgeous, almost every frame worthy of being hung in a museum, and the music is just perfect. It's one of my favorite films, and seems to only get better with age. The Right Stuff was released in the fall of 1983, but as you've probably noticed by the title of this video, I call it the last movie of the 70s. To me, that's not a mistake. I feel The Right Stuff carried on the traditions of 70s filmmaking, even though that auteur-driven era was pretty much over by 1983. To understand why it's the last movie of the 70s, we need to understand what 70s filmmaking represented. 70s Hollywood was a time of unprecedented creative freedom by auteur filmmakers like Francis Coppola, William Friedkin, Robert Altman, Hal Ashby, Michael Cimino, and Terrence Malick. They made soulful, lyrical movies that were often more like tone poems than movies. And luckily, the kinds of movies they wanted to make were the same kinds of movies the studios wanted to make. Back then, it was more about who had the hot film everyone was talking about, rather than who had the biggest box office. And the highest grossing films weren't big-budget action movies like today. They were thoughtful, provocative, introspective, soulful films for adults. Movies were the creative center of the cultural conversation. There was no Twitter, no Instagram, no YouTube, no endless distractions of the smartphone. Two major things happened that wiped the slate clean for the transition into the more studio-dominated, box office-obsessed 80s. The watershed release of Star Wars, which completely obliterated all box office records up to that point, and the devastating failure of Michael Cimino's overindulgent Western Heaven's Gate. Both films represented two sides of the same idea, that directors were too powerful, they wielded way too much control over a film and needed to be reined in, and that you could boil down box office success to a formula that could be repeated over and over. The 80s was a time where ambiguity and depressing stylistic flourishes were out, while bright, colorful, easy-to-digest, uncomplicated fare was in. Thus, The Right Stuff was a bit of an anomaly in 1983. Originally written by William Goldman, who was more interested in the rah-rah, patriotic Americana of the Mercury astronauts, the film was rewritten by the eventual director, Philip Kaufman, who was far more interested in contrasting the soulful purity of loner ace test pilot Chuck Yeager with the patriotic showboating celebrity of the Mercury astronauts. The difference between these two styles of pilot is evoked in several scenes, but it all culminates in the film's most lyrical sequence, the intercutting between the Mercury astronauts being welcomed to Texas and Chuck Yeager's near-disastrous test piloting of an experimental military jet. Yeager is essentially a man caught between two worlds. He wants to go higher, faster, farther, but he's unwilling to compromise his desire to remain the independent maverick, someone who plays by his own rules and shies away from the limelight. He's a man's man and doesn't want outside validation. The love of a good woman is all he needs. The Mercury pilots, on the other hand, are not only comfortable in the limelight, they revel in it. The idea of space travel is something far beyond the mere act of breaking the sound barrier. Yeager's accomplishment is slim pickings. It's not enough. They want more. Space was the final frontier, and America was desperate to take residence there and dominate it before the Russians did. The Mercury men weren't just pilots. They were the country's only hope of beating the Soviets and squashing the threat of communism. This catapulted them to the top of the national stage and created an instant iconography surrounding their very existence. These two very different attitudes is the main thematic fuel that powers the movie's narrative, and it all dovetails into the intercutting sequence I mentioned earlier. This sequence is the culmination of these two disparate ideas between the past, the old-fashioned, soulful purity of the test pilot era, represented by Yeager, and the more crass, commercial, celebrity-driven future of the Mercury astronauts. Outer space had no place for individualistic mavericks like Yeager. It needed audience-friendly team players like the Mercury pilots. This schism embodies the 70s versus 80s filmmaking motif I spoke about earlier. On a thematic level, Kaufman's film is a love letter to the 70s filmmaking revolution, and is unafraid to tackle the conundrum of bravely forging a future without forgetting the past. While the Mercury Men are being celebrated for their magnificence, Yeager is out risking his life just so he can test out a new plane. And as the scene plays out, we realize that Yeager is a man who wants to touch the stars too, but he can never get there. He's not a company man. He's essentially in a stolen plane. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the like and subscribe button, as I'll be posting more content in the future. Thanks for watching.